So here is part 2 of the final web design lecture, which, remember, is about components and layouts. And in part 1, we talked about single elements and also components, right? And so now here in part 2, we are going to talk about bigger components, which I like to call section components, and also some layout patterns. But without further ado, let's get started with the section components. And we're going to start with navigation components. So in all these 4 examples, you have some navigation bar at the top of the page, and then when the user clicks or hovers over some of the menu items, then this submenu reveals itself. And here the submenu or secondary menu is just a small box basically that hovers over the rest of the page. So this is essentially the simplest way of having submenus on the page. And even simpler than this would to not have any submenu at all, which sometimes is also the right choice. So sometimes we just have a navigation bar with some links at the top of the page and without any submenu at all. But if we do need a submenu, which is usually when there are multiple subpages, like you see here in these examples, then we need a menu like this or an even bigger one. And so here are some examples of a kind of more complex submenu. So here we have a bigger box that gets popped out once the user hovers or clicks over one of the navigation items. So this is helpful when you have multiple subpages, or if you want to also include some more information maybe inside of the submenu. So this is essentially taking it one step further from what we had before. And then this one here is even the next step, which is basically having one panel that reveals itself and which occupies the entire width of the page. So these are useful when we have even more links to display or when we want to describe different pages of our website beforehand. So here in this bottom example, these different parts of the website are nicely being described by a short sentence. So this is actually a very nice feature that is becoming quite modern, so that you will see on many websites that you visit these days. And so here are some more examples of that. And again, you see how all of them give a short description about these different pages that the user is about to visit. So it's kind of a small summary of maybe the subproducts that the website has. Then here we have some more examples. Here the one in the bottom of IBM has kind of a sidebar also in the navigation. The one in the top has some very nice images, and again these are actually part of the navigation, just like also on the Apple side, which uses these icons. So actually kind of these product images close to the links themselves. All right. Then here are some more creative uses of navigations where we have some overlays. So these 2 on the right side especially. So this is a navigation pattern that's used on mobile screens where the entire navigation overlays the rest of the page, but it might also be used on the desktop version of these pages, because this simply provides a nice effect in some cases. Then in the bottom, I also have some simpler navigations, and these are usually used in some kind of web application. Then here, finally, we have some examples of secondary navigations. And a secondary navigation is basically just a second navigation bar that shows the user all the other pages that are inside of the current main navigation item. Like in this Blue Wave example here, we are currently in the Community Solar menu item, which has 2 subpages. And so those are project services and sales partners. And so they are nicely displayed here in this secondary navigation for the user to be able to basically navigate this secondary menu item. So these can be helpful again if you have a big website with a lot of different pages. Okay, but now let's actually move on to our hero sections. And the hero section is basically the very first section of the page, which contains like a description of the site in the main heading, and many times it also has some buttons and some images. And right now for the hero section, there are three big trends. The first one is to have text on one side and the image on another side. Then the second one is to have a background image with some text on top. And the third one is to first have some text and then below that some image. And so let's start with the first example. So having the text on one side and then an image on another one. So this is, I would say, the most common hero section that we see these days. So again, some buttons, some headlines, and many times there's also some text description of the product or the service. So here are some more examples of that. And again, I'm including many different examples here because I know that this is going to be really helpful when you need to choose some design for your own hero section one day. So here are even more, and actually even more right here. So this is the first type of hero section. So again, image on one side, text on the other side. And now let's go to the second type. So having a background image and then some text on top. Now this type of hero section used to be extremely popular like 5 years ago, but now it's getting a little bit out of favor and is replaced by the category that we just saw. So here I just have 4 examples, and now here is the other one. So where first we have some text and maybe a button, and they're all nicely centered, and then below that usually we have some kind of image. So that's exactly what you see here in all these 4. And here are 4 more examples of that. And again, hopefully you like one of them for your next design. Then here we have some hybrids, so mixing multiple of the styles that I mentioned before. So that's of course also possible. Next up, let's talk about the pages footers. And again, we can do them in many different ways. But right now it's kind of a trend, and actually it's become a standard even, I would say, to include a complete sitemap of your website right here in the footer. So that's exactly what we have in all these examples right here. Now, if your website is very big with a lot of different pages, then maybe it doesn't make sense to have like an entire sitemap, but at least usually some secondary or even tertiary links are usually found in the footer. So some information about the company or some privacy policies or simply some other information of the company or website. It's also very common to have the social icons in the footer. So the links that will point to the different social media profiles of the company. And sometimes there's also some kind of submit form, like to sign up for some newsletter or something like that. Then here are some more examples, some a little bit more complex or more creative. Now in the bottom here, we actually also have some way more simpler footers. So not always you need to go with a fully fledged footer like the ones we just saw. For example, the Tesla website, which is this very last one here, simply has these 7 or 8 links, and that's it. So that's also an okay choice if you want to go with a more minimalistic approach. Next up, let's talk about call to action sections. And these are some kind of section that we have close to the end of our page, where after presenting all the information that we wanted to show on the page, we then want the user to take some kind of action. So maybe subscribing to a newsletter or trying out a free trial or simply contacting the company. And for these sections, it's quite common to have them stand out from the rest of the elements of the page by using some sort of visual hierarchy, like using a different color or using some background image. So when you build some kind of marketing page, then usually you will want to have some kind of call to action section by the end of the page. So here are some more examples that you can use if you'd like. Then here are 4 more, and this one here, I included them because all of them use the process of social proof once again by the end of the page. So the 2 examples at the top use some customer logos to show again that their product is actually used, And so that adds a lot of social proof. And then the two examples at the bottom, they simply reinforce some of the most important product features, like saying that it is just a one-time purchase, or reassuring the user that there is a 30-day money-back guarantee. So again, these can be very important to push the user over the edge in order to basically have them spend their money. Then these four examples here, they simply ask the user to contact them, which is something that is very useful if the site is not for some kind of service that the user can sign up for. So these four call to action sections, they simply ask the user to contact them. And that can also be a very valid way of having the user take some action by the end of the page. So you can provide some email address or some telephone number or simply a link to a contact form. But whatever your website and your industry is about, always make sure to have some call to action section like this one. Now finally, our last section components are the feature rows. So feature rows are small sections of the page which usually describe some feature of the product or service. And usually multiple of these rows are then combined using some kind of pattern, as we will see in a minute. But anyway, a feature row like this is usually quite simple. So normally there is some kind of image on one side, and then there is some text on the other side. And this text is usually some small heading, and then some description, and also sometimes maybe a button that leads to a page that explains that feature a little bit better. And so that's what we can actually see on all of these four feature rows, right? So always an image, then some text, and three of them actually do have a button. Then here, let's take a look at some more. And I'm sure you have seen these type of feature rows all the time when you browse, well, most type of websites. So take some inspiration from these. And here are some more. And in three of these examples, we actually have a testimonial right here in the feature row. So one testimonial that is related to the feature that is being displayed in this row. And this can be a very powerful way of selling the product or service. And so more and more websites are starting to do this. So definitely something that you can try out once you build your own websites. Then here are some more for your inspiration. And what these have in common, or at least three of them, is that they use a small uppercase title just before the main heading. And so this is another trend that we are starting to see more and more. And I think I actually explained this somewhere else already a little bit. All right, so these are the 5 big section components that I identified and that I'm sure you will start seeing now everywhere once you start browsing the web with this knowledge. And so now let's actually move on to patterns. But what actually is a layout pattern? Well, a layout pattern is simply a specific way of repeating a certain component multiple times. And the most simple layout pattern is probably the simple row of boxes or row of cards. So previously in our component gallery, we actually saw some of them before, but individually. But here we have them repeated in a row. And so this is a very, very common pattern. So having a couple of boxes or a couple of cards like these, all in a row. And so we have seen many examples of this before. And so here we don't need a ton of examples. And so let's go on straight to our second layout pattern, which is actually pretty similar. So here, instead of a row of boxes and cards, we have a 2-dimensional grid. And so again, this is extremely common, especially in something like online shops. But also in displaying features on a website, we will see this pattern all the time. And here are some more examples. Now, as an aside, we can actually also nest patterns inside of components. Now, inside of each of these components, we actually have one of the 2 patterns that we just studied. So 3 of these examples have a grid of cards pattern, and the other one is a a row of cards pattern. So what this means is that we can mix and match all of these patterns and components as we would like. So patterns can contain components, which can in turn also contain some more patterns inside of them. So just keep that in mind when you design on your own. Next up, we have the Z pattern. And so this one here is a combination of different feature rows. So basically the Z pattern is a way of repeating similar feature rows but with alternating configurations. So here in this first example, we first have the image on the left side, then in the next feature row we have it on the right side, and then in the next feature row we have it again on the left side. And so this will then create this kind of Z pattern for our eyes. So we start on the left side, then the eye goes to that content, then to the next content, then to the image, and so on and so forth. Now the reason why this pattern is so extremely popular is that our eyes have a tendency for scanning opposing rows like we have here. And so now that you know about this pattern, you will see it absolutely everywhere once you browse the web. And here are some examples, and most of the time 3 rows are used. So just like in the previous examples and like here in this first example, but of course it can also be more than 3 rows or just 2 rows. So that's completely normal and possible as well. Now next up we have the F pattern, which can also be about repeating feature rows, but the repetition can also be about something like more horizontal cards like we actually have here in the first example. Now, the main difference between the F and the Z pattern is that the configuration of the rows does not alternate. So in the first and second example, we always have the image on the left side and the content on the right, while on the right side, we basically have the inverted F pattern. So we have the images on the right and then the content on the left. So basically we draw the main axis here where the images are because they draw the most attention, and then from there we go to the content. So that's why I mentioned that the last one is the inverted F pattern. And here there are 3 more examples where actually all of them are the inverted F pattern, but usually we can simply call them F pattern anyway. But what matters here is that basically the images are all on one side and then the text content is on the other ones. So no alternating configurations in this one. All right, now next up we have the single column pattern. Now this one is mostly used on responsive websites on mobile phones, or also on just very simple websites like these 3 ones that we have here. Also, this layout can be used on simple blog posts where we don't want any sidebars for distraction. And speaking of sidebars, that actually brings me to our next pattern, which is exactly the sidebar pattern. So the sidebar can be used for blocks, as I just mentioned, or they can be used for options in a web application or as a table of contents or also as a summary. So here we have examples of all of those. And here then in the next slide, we have some examples of web applications where we then have a sidebar where all the different options are located. Now we're almost finishing here. Next up, we have the multi-column or magazine layout. So this one is basically about combining different columns with different width into some kind of layout that I'm sure we're all familiar with. So basically to create some kind of more traditional magazine layout like these. And finally, we also have these more experimental or asymmetric layouts. So here we can use all our creativity in order to create some standout designs. So all of these are quite uncommon, but they will allow us to give our design some kind of different impact to our users. And by the way, many of these experimental layouts were actually made possible by CSS Grid. So for example here, the first and second examples, they are clearly like very gritty, right? And some years ago, this was almost impossible to build. And so we didn't see layouts like these a couple of years ago. But now, more and more, we start seeing designs like these popping up. And that's also because many designers are getting a little bit tired of designing always the same kinds of layouts that we see all over again. And so that's why there has been a small trend, at least, towards these more experimental layouts. So here are some more, and I think all of them are quite nice. And actually, not your entire page needs to have this more experimental layout. So these first 3 examples that we have here are actually just a small section of each of their websites. And so you can, of course, also do that. So basically just including something like a small grid like this, because that alone might give your design a special impact. Okay, and that's all I had to show you for layout patterns. So I hope that you find this as interesting as I did. So I really took a lot of time compiling these and researching all of these different layouts and components as well, because this stuff really fascinates and interests me. So hopefully I was able to spark some of that interest in you as well, because that was actually one of my main goals with all these design lectures. And with this, we do actually finish our web design lectures. So again, I hope you had a lot of fun with those, but this section is actually not finished yet. So we will now build 2 components, one hero section and one web application layout. So I hope to see you there soon so that we can get back to code here.